Okay, take three. Uh, this is Zeri, Persian pen name on AO3, once again here to read you some stories and track my transition. It is week 30, and I am starting to get some voice changes. Um, last week I had my second shot of testosterone as opposed to the creams that I'd been taking. Um, there is definitely a difference both in the dosage and in the method of application. The application is so, like, I can't do it to myself. I have to get my spouse. It doesn't hurt. I just can't make myself stab me in the leg. Um, yeah, just can't do it. So I've noticed this week I'm, again, getting voice changes. My voice sounds raspier. I think it's a little bit lower, maybe. Um, I tend to sing a lot in the car because I'm, actively trying to keep a good vocal range. And it's this past week I've noticed that the higher notes for me will feel the same in my throat, but nothing is coming out of my mouth, which is interesting. And it doesn't feel like when I'm trying to hit notes that I know are too high for me. Like, it feels like the amount of air that I have to push through is more in order to get the same effect. Like, once I get over that bump, it'll go, but it's more of an effort to make that note happen. So, that's a thing I've noticed. What else has been going on this week? I have... I finished the gray section, or at least the first gray section, for my Garterlac scarf. I don't remember if I've shown this one or not. I think I have. But, so here's this. I finished the gray bits, and now I'm working on the next of the silk bits. I think I'm only going to have enough silk for 2 of the lines of silk. And then I may or may not have any left over. We'll find out. I have not heard back from the county job, so I need to call them tomorrow and see, make sure they got my application and all of that. I should have done that earlier this week. I didn't. I haven't. One of my coworkers who works part-time at the hotel with me and then has a full-time job elsewhere has recommended me for a separate position where at the place where he works full-time, and I did apply for that today, so that's something. It's been so long since I was applying to jobs that I don't know what's common anymore. So, like, I don't have a LinkedIn. Things like that. They did have a part where it's like, hey, tell us what your salary needs are. And I'm like, okay, I don't believe that anything I put in here is something I'm going to actually get, so I'm going to aim high and we'll see what happens. So I put in $20 an hour. Let's see if it fucking works. I don't think it will, but on the off chance it does, hey. There was an area where it was asking about, hey, do you have any disabilities that we need to know about? And, epilepsy was specifically on the list, so yeah, I'm epileptic. I haven't had a seizure in over 20 years, but my brain is an epileptic brain. It's not going to work like a neurotypical brain. I took an autism spectrum test today. I think it's the RRASD, something like that. Yeah. They're like, okay, 90 is when we start thinking, yeah, you're autistic. 160 some odd is where we're like, this is where most autistic people get. I had 120 something. So that's a thing. Also, a lot of the questions really could have been Like, they did not have sufficient context. They were not... They were unclear to the point of being unhelpful. Which I understand is very common, a complaint among people taking autism tests. So, do I think that, like, it matters if I got an autism diagnosis? Probably not at this point in my life. I'm, closing in on 41. I've been this weird forever. It ain't gonna get any different. But it is, regardless, I can look at things and say, hey, is this something that's going to be helpful to me? If it is something that helps autistic people. And sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. And we'll, go from there. Let's see. What else has been going on this week? Oh, my mother-in-law fell. Which, give me 1 second. I can hear her puttering around, which means y'all can too. There we go, unpause, so y'all don't have to worry about that. And she doesn't have to hear me, ranting into the sky. But yeah, so, she's an older lady. Falling is really bad. So we had to go to the emergency room, and she got an x-ray and a CT scan and all of that good stuff, and she's okay. She's all right. Her hand, she fell on her elbow, and we thought it might be broken or sprained or anything, but it appears to be all right. She's feeling a lot better and has, like, no grip strength is the thing now that she's got. But, we're here to take care of her. That's why we live here. So, we're doing that. The thing that she tripped on, she knocked her foot against a loom that I've got, a little table loom that happened to be in the living room. Really not sure how, but, like, there was a lot of room around it, but, people fall. That's how it do. I'm actually going to be rehoming that loom, and probably my second spinning wheel, definitely, like, lending it out, just probably just gonna let it stay with there. A friend of mine up in San Antonio is wanting to learn to spin, and you can't really just rent a spinning wheel from somewhere. That's not really a service that you get. And this one I got several years back. Goodness. I got it for a damn steal. I got it for $100 at a thrift store, and it's an Ashford Elizabeth wheel. And here, I'm going to look up what price that is, because those things are not cheap. Yeah, that's $1,000 wheel. Hot damn. So, anyway, but I got it for like $100, so what the fuck. The only thing is that it's a single treadle wheel, which I prefer double treadle, and that's fine. My Babe is a double treadle bobbin lead, and the Elizabeth is a double drive band wheel. But my big complaint with it is that the Flyer does have 2 set of hooks, but, like, if this is the plane of the Flyer, the hooks on this side go up and the hooks on this side go down. So I can't lace across, like, on my Babe, they both go up, and so there's, like, a side with no hooks. And I can lace the single into hooks on both sides, which reduces the speed difference between the Flyer and the bobbin, which reduces the take-up, so that I'm able to spin a much thinner yarn, which is what I generally like to spin. So I can't do that on the Elizabeth. I'm sure there's a way to do that, but I don't know what it is. And I've got, oh my god, closing in on 20 years experience with the Babe, so damn. I hadn't realized I had it that long. But yeah, I got that thing in like, what, 2006? Something like. So, damn. My hair is just not wanting to play nice today. That's just going to be how it be. But anyway, so I'm gonna lend it to her, and maybe she'll like it and maybe she won't, and either way she can see how it does. And if she doesn't care for it, it'll come back, and if she likes it, it'll probably stay with her. So I'm also gonna adjust this a little. There we go. Now that spouse's computer isn't being all bright. Let's see, what else has been going on this week? Did I mention the job? I think I mentioned the job. Yeah, I did. I did that, and I did the unlawful. This is my third go of making this video because the first time I got interrupted. The second time I hadn't realized I had left my fan on until quite a ways in, and it's not a quiet fan, so nobody needs that kind of droning going on in the background. Unless it's by choice, in which case you can open another window of something and get you a nice drone going. Let's see what else has been going on this week. I mentioned the voice change, the scarf. Yep, that's really all I got, so. It's super busy at work. One thing that'll be nice about if I take the job that my coworker recommended is that it's all over the phone, which means that I won't have people inappropriately commenting on my body, which happens at the hotel, and I don't like it. That has been a thing this week. I have hands. They're just hands. They're not like special or magic or anything. I don't need some strange man to tell me how long my fingers are and imply what he would like done with them. It's not a thing that needs to happen at work. If that's a thing that you do to other people, please stop. If that's a thing that is done to you, I am sorry. So yeah, just don't comment on other people's bodies when they are at work. That's not appropriate. In general, if you're wanting to compliment somebody, compliment them on something that they have a choice about. Like, hey, I like your glasses. My glasses are nifty as hell. I like my glasses too. I will gush with you about where to get good online glasses. But don't talk about my hands and what could be done with them, because I don't know you and I really don't want to after that. So, that's a thing. Anyway, let's read a story. Today we're gonna go with... mark that for later. That's okay, there we are. Yes, today we're reading part 2 of the Wayfarer series by Whydah, or Azandra. This is going to be another story with Phaedra, just like last week. I really liked the one from last... I'm enjoying the... what's it called? I'm enjoying reading something that is a two-parter. I'm enjoying serialization. There we go, that's the word. So, another thing with my voice just starting to change, hopefully, I really need to record. There's a couple of podfics that I want to do, and if my voice is going to be changing, that's fine for the narration, I don't care, but I really got to record the character lines while I have one consistent voice. Because the one that I'm wanting to do as a surprise for a friend of mine is a super, super long one. Well over 100K. I think it's over 200K now. I don't think it's 300K, but it might be. Anyway, I really need to record all of the lines At least for the main characters. Because, like, if I end up with a voice up here, if I start out with a voice up here, and I end up with a voice down here, that's not going to be good for the readers. They're not going to like that. But it is very funny. So that's a thing. Alright, so, anyway. This is What Leaves the Woods by Whydah. It is original work, fairy tale logic, fantasy setting, fed up protagonist, which is a great tag. The summary is, it happens on occasion that you can't even employ repair services without going through an entire tedious series of pseudo-mystical errands. So here we go. The old saying was, up a mountain, down a hill. If Phaedra lost memory of anything else, she'd probably remember this one, because it had been etched into the walls of her mind by her first driving teacher. Damn it. Right at the start of the story. Who had, in turn, had it etched upon the outside of her flask, in slanting cursive. It was hard not to remember a phrase, when it was tinged with the terror Phaedra had felt upon seeing old Dame Corinne take a swig before tackling a particularly steep canyon ledge with her rickety old caravan. Up a mountain, down a hill, with a screaming apprentice latched into the leather of the passenger seat like a panicked cat. Well, somewhere up the mountain, Phaedra's caravan had broken down, and she'd had to leave it by the side of the road in order to hike to the town of Karamis and inform them of where their food shipment was. The Karamids had been grateful for the shipment, in their curt fashion, but Phaedra felt as if she'd instantly burned through their gratitude when she informed them that she would not be leaving immediately. I need to repair my caravan first, she explained. The caravan was hardly a contraption, and with all the spell work etched into the undercarriage, it could fit itself onto any road, no matter how narrow. But, as with anything, there were trade-offs, and in this case it was steep climbs, such as those which had brought her to Karamis. Phaedra had felt the snap and break of something as she overcame the arch of a hill, and the gentle plink of the clockwork sparrow as it fell unmoving onto its side on the dashboard. She explained all of this apologetically, hoping to convey that it was not something Phaedra would have chosen. The Karamids blinked their many eyes at her, with what Phaedra felt was disapproval. You may stay in the woods until you can leave, the town's administratrix had said. Administratrix, I like that word. The town's administratrix had said, the woods do not belong to us. The administratrix made it sound more like they did not wish anything of theirs polluted by Phaedra's presence. It suited Phaedra just fine, however. She only needed to engage the local blacksmith for a few days, to replace some old piece in the engine. What she hoped would go much quicker was the visit to the town's toy shop. She spotted it down the road from the blacksmith, with its glass shop front, and the hanging sign in bright colors. As she came closer, she saw that even the traditional depictions of the local deity that every shop in Karamis boasted was in bright shades. The many-eyed mother drawn on the door of the blacksmith's forge had been smoky, drawn in shades of charcoal, accented with fire red. The one on the toy shop door was brightly cheerful, each eye in a different color, each one of the many-eyed mother's limbs holding a different toy. The smile, in particular, other than being sharp as a drawer full of razors, managed to look playful. When Phaedra entered the shop, however, none of the cheer seemed to carry into it. The shop was dusty, poorly lit, apparently fallen on hard times. Phaedra walked all the way up to the counter before she even noticed anyone was inside. What she thought had been a tarp covering some piece of furniture began moving of its own accord and sauntered closer to the counter, where a stray shaft of sunlight revealed it as the proprietor of the toy shop. "May I help you?" the toy maker drawled, one of her eyes blinking lazily while the other two swiveled towards the door and then to Phaedra. Phaedra reached into her coat pocket and took out the clockwork sparrow, which she placed onto the counter carefully. "Can you fix this?" Phaedra asked. The toy maker reached down, took the sparrow and weighed it in one hand carefully. Then, with long, skeletal fingers, she twisted the sparrow's key. Empty clacks filled the air, the grinding of uncooperative gears and fatigued metal, until the key would be turned no more. The toymaker released the wind-up key, however. It turned too fast, with a discordant metallic whine. The sparrow did not wake up. As the toymaker pried open the sparrow to have a look at its innards, Phaedra looked around the shop. The shelves were full of toys, yet by the coating of dust, it didn't seem that the shop had seen any business in a long time. She didn't like how this added up to the fact that she'd seen no children about town, and tried very hard to forget she'd noticed. "Not a mere toy, this." The toymaker spoke evenly, her voice slow like clouds rolling across the sky. "Except when it's broken," Phaedra said. True enough," the toymaker agreed, and considered for a few moments. "I will repair this for you, but you must make payment first." "Make it how?" Phaedra asked, already weighing caution against the price. "In the forest there is a well," the toymaker said. "Bring me water from it, and that will be payment enough." "How much water?" "Any at all will be impressive enough," the toymaker replied dryly, before reaching into a drawer and taking out a ceramic whistle in the shape of a bird. "Enough to fill this, perhaps." Phaedra took the whistle. She recognized the type. It would make a sharp, flat note when it was empty, and it would make a warbling bird call when filled with water. She'd often played with such things as a child, though in the shapes of different birds. "About a flaskful, sure," Phaedra said, placing the bird whistle back on the counter. "Be careful," the toymaker drawled, almost amused. "The woods do not belong to us." Finding the well was no trouble at all, even with the vague directions she received. If anything, the vagueness of the directions seemed to speed up the process considerably. Phaedra was barely out of town when she saw the well's crane through the trees. The well itself was narrow and circular, made with smooth river rocks. The crane was old weathered wood. One end had a counterweight, and the other had a length of rope tied to a battered old bucket. Phaedra lowered the bucket into the well for a very long time before she heard the splash of water, then pulled on the other end of the crane to lift it up again. When she'd been younger, and a great deal smaller, she'd enjoyed the moment of weightlessness when pulling the bucket back up, when she acted as a counterweight herself and her feet were off the ground for a moment, more than a jump would have permitted. Then the crane would lower on her side again and raise up the bucket on the other, and the moment would be gone again, dropping her back to the reality of the ground. She was much too old, and her adult arms much too strong now. It seemed she required only a tug, and the rope went taut. The bucket was lifted in moments, and carefully set on the lip of the well again, brimming with water. Phaedra dunked her flask into the water. It was numbing cold, like a mountain pond, and smelled fresh and sweet. She wondered what would happen if she drank, if there was something special about it, if it belonged to whoever the woods belonged to. Not the Caramids, obviously, as they insisted on pointing out. Just to be safe, she wouldn't drink, though her mouth felt strangely parched nonetheless. She capped her flask before she even noticed she was not alone, and then froze in place, only her head turning. An old man stood at the edge of the clearing. He wore a ground-sweeping old robe, which at one point might have been a color other than the time-worn, but also now settled into a tired brown. The hems were embroidered with stylized vertical eyes, in a disgraced royal purple and waning shades of red. He had a hood pulled up over his head, but both it and the upper part of his face were concealed by an old helmet like a goat's skull, horns broken. His hands were old. They were old hands, tanned like leather, soft like thin paper, ill-fitting over equally old bones. And he carried a bucket, a perfectly mundane object which would have looked at home on any farmstead. He must have walked this far, Phaedra was sure. He must have taken steps to stand so close to her, but she hadn't heard a single branch break under his foot, or the rustle of leaves under the weight of his robe's hem. The woods knew him like a favorite coat knew its owner. "Child," he said, with a voice as warm as a mother's hearth, "will you help an old man carry water to his house? It's not far, but I am very old, and my garden is parched." Phaedra carefully, pointedly, put the flask inside her coat's breast pocket. "Sure," she said. He nodded, slowly, gratefully, and handed her the bucket. The well's pail was still full of water, so she tipped this into the old man's bucket, filling it almost completely. "Yes, that will do," he said. "Thank you. Come along." She picked up the bucket and followed, along a well-worn trail she had not noticed existing until it was under her feet. They walked in silence for a while, nothing but the strange sounds of the woods around them. Then, awkwardly, as if out of practice with civility, the old man spoke. "How are you today, dear?" he said. "I'm well enough," Phaedra said, because that was true. It was a crisp, windless day, edging into the cold season, and she was not actively experiencing any discomfort, save for the temporary weight of the bucket in her hands. "You come from Caramus?" he asked. "I'm passing through. Caravan." "Ah," the old man said, "certainly." After a few more moments of silence, Phaedra felt compelled to continue the conversation. "You don't come from Caramus?" "I come from the woods," the old man replied, "since before Caramus." After a pause, he added in a softer voice, with a distant longing, "I am no longer welcome in Caramus." "I'm not particularly welcome in Caramus either," Phaedra said. "Don't know if it's for the same reason." "In a way," the old man said. "They measure a body's worth by the number of eyes, you see. Many eyes of even number is good, but odd numbers are better. You only have 2, which is both an unforgivably small number and an unfortunately even one at that." "So what problem do they have with you, then?" "A lack," the old man said, and pushed back his goat skull helmet to reveal his face. Phaedra's jaw clenched, and she looked into the old man's face for a few polite seconds, before slowly turning her gaze ahead to the road. She squelched any other reaction. "Well, that's pretty rotten," she said. "Oh, those were exactly the healer's words when looking upon my face," the old man said with a sly smile. Phaedra gave him a critical, sidelong look, because though his face was now healed, his humor was certainly terminal. Finally they came upon a cottage in the woods, made of woven branches and charred black in color, with shutters drawn closed over the windows and a door as white as bone. An orange cat was curled up sleeping on the roof, breaking the color theme somewhat. It opened a single eye to give Phaedra an uninterested look before going back to sleep. "Thank you for your help, young lady," the old man said as Phaedra lowered the bucket to the ground. "Come again if you'd like to keep an old man company. You've been here, so you'll find the place again. I'll make tea." The old man nodded thoughtfully at his own words before stopping and pursing his lips. "But do not travel the woods at night," he advised as an afterthought. "The woods do not belong to me at night." "Sure," she said, because it was the only adequate response she could muster. Property laws around these parts seemed like a pain to deal with. It did not occur to Phaedra to ask who the woods belonged to at night, mostly because she didn't care. She planned to spend the night inside her caravan, and she didn't think that counted as being in the woods, because from her perspective, she was indoors. She didn't think to account for the fact that some people didn't count a vehicle as being quite indoors enough, because she awoke to the sight of a visitor curled atop the cabinet across from her mattress in the sleeping compartment. She could see only the suggestion of a shape in the darkness, but she felt a heavy gaze upon her, as if a full auditorium's worth of eyes were fixated on her. Still worse were the perfectly ordinary sounds of someone scuffling through her compartment, the breathing, the creak of joints, the brush of skin. She didn't turn on the light because some instinct told her that would have been the wrong move. As long as she couldn't see whoever had broken in, so there we go, see? As long as she couldn't see whoever had broken in, she knew she was in far less danger. Phaedra pulled her blanket over her head and went back to sleep. She woke up the next morning, fully aware she hadn't dreamed the entire thing the night before, and deeply disappointed by that fact. She disliked interlopers. She headed into Karamis, ready to be out of this place for good. When she arrived at the toy shop, the toy maker seemed far too surprised to see her for Phaedra's liking. "Have you managed to finish the repairs?" Phaedra asked. "No," the toy maker said in her usual slow drawl, managing to drag the word across 3 syllables. "In truth, I didn't expect you to return, so I did not even try." Phaedra had no response to that. She had to compose herself before reaching into her pocket and pulling out the flask. The toy maker's 3 eyes all lit up with excitement as Phaedra uncapped the flask and pushed it across the counter. "Well, well," the toy maker said, delicately sniffing the contents. "You did manage it. I shall surely have to begin repairs, then." "Surely," Phaedra echoed. "Before I can do so, however," the toy maker continued, "there is another task you might perform." "Is it a task you expect me to return from?" The toy maker tilted her chin up, looking insulted by the question. "What do you need?" Phaedra said, ready to be done with this town's foolishness. The toy maker pushed the bird whistle and the flask both back towards Phaedra, smiling a saccharine smile. Phaedra's eye narrowed, because she understood full well that she was merely the first fool to manage getting water from the woods somehow. "Go back into the woods," the toy maker instructed, "and use the bird whistle. Then take a feather from the first bird you encounter, and bring it back to me." "Well, straightforward enough," Phaedra muttered, and crammed the whistle and flask into her pocket. She returned to the woods, despite the creeping feeling that she might be tempting fate each time she did. It was eerily quiet, but she filled the bird whistle with water and blew on it as hard as her lungs could manage. The whistle warbled its watery bird call, the sound bouncing between trees until it disappeared into the wilderness unanswered. Phaedra kept her ears pricked, expecting some kind of a response to the bird whistle, but the woods remained judgmentally silent. It occurred to her, perhaps belatedly, that there may well not be any birds at all in the forest. It had the kind of unnatural quiet that came from the absence of living creatures, and Phaedra didn't like how it was beginning to look like she was being treated like a fool. She blew on the bird whistle again, this time a more prolonged note, and when that yielded no response, she blew on it again, this time so hard that the whistle didn't even produce an audible note. Her forehead was beginning to throb unpleasantly with the beginnings of a headache. Before she could decide what to do next, a crack of a branch startled her. Phaedra whipped around towards the sound, and was almost scared out of her skin at the sight of the old blind man. Phaedra clutched at her chest as she let out a breath. "Oh, it's you." "An understated reaction compared to those I usually receive," the old man commented wryly. "Gods," Phaedra muttered more to herself. "Is the usual reaction a genuine heart attack instead of a near one?" "One would be surprised," the old man said, "though I must admit I suffer no small amount of surprise to see you return, child." "Well, probably a bad sign coming from a creepy old man in the forest, but can't be helped." "I see," he said, probably being figurative. "Would you like to join me for tea?" There will be small pastries as well, he added. Well, I don't see how I can refuse, then. She followed him to his strange house, where he indeed prepared tea for her. It was deep, dark red in the cup, and smelled fruity, though she couldn't name the fruit if she tried. She didn't ask, either. She didn't want some answer like, "It is squeezed from the blood of the forest," or "I have harvested from the heart of my last guest before you." "While you are here," the old man said, sitting on the front steps and blindly staring off into the distance, "would you mind terribly doing me a favor?" "I suppose not." "My chickens frequently lay eggs under the woodpile, but I'm old, you see, and my knees aren't what they used to be." "Yeah, knees go that way. Understandable." "Would you mind terribly?" "Scavenging for eggs? Sure, why not? That's the most normal thing anyone has asked me to do today. Point the way." So she ended up crouched on the ground and groping through the mud under the woodpile for eggs. The old man's chickens were black as tar and had malevolent little black eyes to match. They sat on top of the woodpile with haughty little chicken faces staring down at her, looking terribly smug that anything they'd done had led to Phaedra flopping around in the mud. She did find eggs under the woodpile, at least. 3 gray-tinted eggs, large and still warm. And stuck to the eggs by slick mud were tiny black feathers. Chicken down, if she wasn't mistaken. They matched the color of 2 of the chickens perched on top of the woodpile, and the birds continued to give her their malevolent little glares as Phaedra looked them over. Well, this is what she was supposed to get, wasn't she? And these were the first birds she encountered. So she pocketed the feathers and passed the eggs on to the old man. "Ah," he said, turning them over in his hands, "and they're still fresh. A delight, truly." "Sure," Phaedra said. "Glad to help." The toy maker sniffed as the feathers were presented to her. "They reek," she complained. "They come from a chicken's behind," Phaedra said. The toy maker's mouth slanted in disgust, but she had no choice but to accept the feathers. She placed them into a drawer, and her expression mellowed out into only mild distaste once the feathers were out of sight. "I assume there must be some third onerous errand you need of me," Phaedra said. The toy maker hemmed and hawed in response. "Now, why would you say that?" "Because I don't see my sparrow fixed yet." The toy maker sighed and hung her head, as though being forced to concede to this admission was a horrible slight to her pride. "Very well, the last task. Go into the woods tonight with the bird call whistle. Play it, and bring back into town whatever follows you out of the woods." "You want me to go into the woods at night," Phaedra repeated slowly. "Yes," the toy maker confirmed. "And you won't because it's dangerous." "But it's not dangerous for me to do it?" Phaedra raised an eyebrow. "Evidently it is dangerous for you to do it," the toy maker sniffed, as if despising Phaedra for stating something so obvious. She crossed one set of arms, and the finger on the other set tapped an impatient tattoo on the countertop. "But?" "But," the toy maker said, "I'm not the one who needs her sparrow repaired." Which was true enough. It was still a ways off from evening, and Phaedra walked the streets of Karamis with a tourist meander. Not that Karamis had any of the qualities that encouraged outside visitors. There was an unstirred dustiness to the town's roads, like something was missing. The Karamids watched her with countless suspicious eyes as she passed, all with a certain gray-faced quality of people who didn't possess much energy, and certainly wouldn't be wasting it on Phaedra if they did. Phaedra stopped in front of a confectionery shop. The painted glass pane depicted a cheerful spider, 9 eyes glittering like globs of caramel. The display in the window was enticing. The only thing missing were children, with their faces pressed up to the glass. But then, if not even the toy shop had any, Phaedra was less surprised to see none here. A toy shop in town, yet no children in sight. She stopped to ponder the sweets in the window. It was polite to bring a gift when dropping in for a visit, wasn't it? It was edging into twilight when Phaedra reached the old man's cottage. He sat on his front steps still, whittling something. As Phaedra got closer, she could see it was the shape of some animal sitting on its haunches. It could have been a wolf, or a fox, or a lion. The details hadn't quite come together yet. The obsidian blade in the old man's hands moved slowly and surely, shaving off a long curl of wood. "Back already," he said, part curious observation, part non-committal remark. "Do you ever walk the woods at night?" Phaedra asked with no preamble. If this was rude, If this was rude, she certainly didn't know any form she would have to follow. She settled for being direct. "The woods do not belong to me at night," the old man said by way of answer, which really was no answer as Phaedra understood the notion. "I don't know that pertains to my question." A smile curled on the old man's lips, pulling at wrinkles and the suggestion of an old scar across his lips. "I have no eyes, you see," he said. "I could very well walk the woods, but the woods are not mine at night. And how is an old man meant to see danger with no eyes?" Phaedra nodded and reached into her coat, removing the object she'd been carrying there. "You could try this," she said, extending it towards him. The obsidian blade faltered over the wood, dug a groove where there shouldn't have been one. The old man's head tilted towards the proffered object. It was a mask, beautifully painted. No holes for the eyes to peer out, but 5 eyes were painted across its surface regardless, precisely and delicately rendered. "I was told it was a gift," Phaedra continued, "though not for me." A breath wheezed out of him, sharp with shock. He placed the blade and the unfinished wooden animal aside, and reached for the mask with his bony hands. When he settled the mask on his face, every painted line seemed to have been made in continuity with his own features, as though the object were bespoke. He did not become the mask, but the mask became him, and Phaedra couldn't remember if it had looked like that before he put it on, save that it looked very much like his face now, despite not resembling what she'd seen under the helmet. The eyes of the mask were the same stylized shape as the eyes on his robe, and she hadn't noticed that until this very moment. The sun was only an orange smear at the horizon, dipping behind the mountains as night encroached. Night gently settled over the forest as the mask had done over the old man's face. "Would you like to take a stroll, child?" the old man asked. Phaedra only noticed that his voice used to rattle more in his chest, because now it sounded smooth and sure again. "Well, I do have an errand to make," Phaedra said. It was darker in the woods than the moonlight peeking through the branches should have allowed. It was nothing but shades of blackness to Phaedra, and likely she would have walked headfirst into every tree in her path, if the old man didn't have a steady hand on her shoulder to steer her. In her reprieve from needing to navigate the darkness, Phaedra blew into the bird whistle instead. Its call warbled in the dark. It sounded different as it bounced and echoed against trees she couldn't see. The liquid burbling of the sound took on a more organic quality, and if she didn't have the whistle in her hand, and a slight wooziness from blowing into it constantly, Phaedra would almost think the sound came from a real bird. She couldn't guess which. She wasn't much for ornithology. Some local songbird, she'd guessed, nocturnal to fit the theme. Phaedra didn't know what was meant to happen until she finally stumbled into a clearing. The moon shone down like a spotlight, unnaturally bright, where before it had been unnaturally dim. And it reflected off dozens and dozens of eyes. Phaedra stopped blowing into the bird whistle then. Maybe she was still meant to, but she needed a moment for her head to clear, and for her mind to match the number of silhouettes to the number of eyes. She'd forgotten the Karamids had so many, just as a matter of course. But the Karamids in town were also a lot taller than these ones. Well, at least she found out where their children had gone. "You will need to find your own way back," the old man said kindly, and reached into his robes, pulling out a small lantern. He tapped the glass, and it flared to a light, glowing gold. The children, eerily quiet until then, flinched back and gasped. "You're not supposed to have that," one of them said urgently. "Mother will not allow lights at night." "I'll talk to her," the old man promised kindly. "But we grown-ups have things to discuss, so I'm going to have to ask you to leave with this young lady." Clusters of distrustful eyes turned to Phaedra. In the light of the lantern the old man was holding, Phaedra could see starved faces, streaked with dirt, threadbare clothing, hardly fit to keep out the forest chill. Phaedra reached into her coat. She stuffed the bird whistle into a pocket, and took out a brown bag instead, opening it and rolling down the edges of its mouth to better reveal their content. "I brought sweets for you," she said, with the sense that she was instilling a terrible lesson about whether to accept candy from strangers. "Would you like to try some before we leave?" The children, maybe 15 or 20 of them, though it was hard to tell for sure in the dark, leaned towards her, pulled in by the sweets more than anything Phaedra herself said. The children crowded around Phaedra, and one of the oldest took charge of the bag of sweets, beginning to distribute them among the younger ones. A small, snotty child was the first to receive theirs, and after stuffing it into their mouth, proceeded to latch onto the tail of Phaedra's coat with their sticky fingers, leaving stains on the material. Phaedra decided just to be grateful she didn't have to hold that child's hand. A different one latched onto their hand instead, some weedy, pig-tailed menace with a grip like a steel trap. The old man gave Phaedra the lantern. "This will show you home, and keep you warm until you get there, as long as you step only where the light falls. But it is best you leave sooner rather than later." Phaedra turned back the way she'd come, as best she could guess the direction, and began shuffling out of the clearing with her cohort of children. The lantern's light fell onto the forest floor in a narrow shaft, a path bracketed on both sides by fathomless darkness. The children clung close, wary of stepping off the path. The sound of smacking lips and candy sucking was almost loud enough in the clear night air to hide the sound of footsteps approaching, the crackling of leaves under someone's soles. But Phaedra knew of the arrival even with her back turned, because she heard the sharp intake of breath the children took. "Come on, let the grown-ups talk," Phaedra said, pushing the nearest ones along. "It's all boring stuff anyway." It was morning by the time they reached Karamis. They'd walked and walked and walked, a steady trundle through the forest, going only in the direction that the lantern's light revealed, and they emerged from the tree line, blinking and dragging their feet. The morning was gray in the coolness of the pre-dawn light, and their breaths were silvery clouds in the cold air. The children had been huddled together, but now they broke off from the group and scattered across the roads of Karamis. Since they probably knew where they lived better than Phaedra did, she let them go. Was the toy shop even open at this time of day? Phaedra felt almost disgusted at the thought of going there again, and dealing with the recalcitrant toy maker. She fiddled with the lantern to turn it off as she delayed, and then remembered the bird whistle in her pocket. She'd have to return that as well, wouldn't she? Yet, as she reached into her pocket to retrieve it, her fingers grasped cold metal instead of ceramic. When she drew out the object, it was not the bird whistle, but her own clockwork sparrow, quiet and still. She didn't think the toy maker was responsible for this, if only because Phaedra had not come to expect such prompt and convenient service from her. Phaedra turned the sparrow's key 3 times, with the mechanical grinding sound that she knew by ear, and then the key began turning on its own as it was released. The sparrow's eyes opened, and its legs twitched. "Oh, I have such a headache," the sparrow complained. A relief, in that it was at least awake to complain at all. "It has been going around," Phaedra agreed. The end. Yeah, I like that one a lot. I'm glad to have done this little two-parter. That was lovely. It was nice. It had some good rule of threes going on. We've got some missing children. Who doesn't? That was a very well told story. Very, very fairy tale-ish. Definitely achieved its goals there. So, then I arrange myself. My voice is a little bit giving out because I've been talking for a whole hour and change. So yeah, that's this week's story. I really enjoyed it. I hope that you all did too. Have fun. Be good. I'll see you guys next week. I'm going to give my voice a rest for a while. And we'll see what it sounds like next week when I see you then. All right, bye-bye.